How we doing, Georgia?
Looks good.
All right. Thanks everybody for being here. My name is Roger Royce. I'm a partner with Haynes Boone in Palo Alto, California. Today we are talking about how to prepare your startup for venture capital funding. I have probably around 100 slides here. I'm not going to get through all of them, not even going to try. However, I am going to hit the high points. We've only got about an hour of presentation and then a half hour of Q&A. So I want to make sure that this content is valuable and meaningful. First of all, just keep in mind, this is information. It's not legal advice. I'm speaking generally, and your facts may differ. You know, you change the facts, you change the outcome. So don't anybody take this as legal advice. Go see a lawyer, a licensed attorney, somebody other than AI, if you want to find out how these apply to your specific facts. That's a picture of a VC. And that's what we're going to talk about today is the getting your startup ready for the VC. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what to expect when you talk to them, talk a little bit about what you should do before you get there, talk a little bit about how you should prepare your company. And just by way of introduction, I've been doing this since the mid 80s. I've been here in Silicon Valley since 91 or 92. That's a long time. And I've done lots and lots and lots of VC deals. So I've gotten to know that community extremely well. And it's as much lore as it is law. And I'm going to give you the law and what they expect to see. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the practical things that you should think about because you don't get much time. You don't get much of an opportunity. You only get one chance to make a first impression, right? So you definitely don't want to blow it. And I've seen a lot of people just make little mistakes that had outsized consequences. So why are we talking about this? You know, let me give you some funding statistics. Last year, 2025, was a very big year. It was the biggest year, I think, since 2021. Lots of deals. The deal count was essentially flat. So there's some weird things going on. Tons of money going into the market, but not a lot more deals. And I think the thing that's kind of skewed the curve is that such a large percentage of that money went into big companies. Um, so, just kind of take that with a grain of salt. Nevertheless, yeah, it's still the second strongest year on record ever after the 2021 peak. And that had its own weird dynamics because there was a lot of pent up demand and dry powder as a result of the COVID lockdowns. 2026 is shaping up to be even a bigger year. Our VC investment in 2026, according to PitchBook, this is all PitchBook data, by the way, is higher than most of the whole year totals for any other year, except last year, of course. But it's way bigger than our previous quarterly record. But again, there are some weird dynamics here. So you got to take this with a grain of salt because there were just a handful of companies that accounted for most of the commitments. Nevertheless, funds have raised a ton of money already. I mean, just look at the numbers, and the valuations keep climbing. So even if you're not one of the five companies that's getting all the money, it seems like uh, the median pre-money valuation is now pretty high, 18 million. Way more, it's double than it was in 2021, and half of early stage deals now exceed $10 million. So the numbers are rising, the valuations are rising. You can see there's that what's going on at the upper end is affecting the entire ecosystem. Here in the Bay Area, where I sit, and there's a few of us here, this is the center of the venture capital universe, as far as I'm concerned. It's why I'm here. It's why I moved here from New York. Anyway, San Francisco startups raised a record amount of money in 2025. I guess this data is a little dated, but it's still about half of all the U.S. venture capital, and that's a statistic that really runs true throughout forever. It always has and always will. And Bay Area startups got a pretty big share of the global funding in AI. I want to talk about AI in a minute here, but we can't have a discussion today about anything financial without mentioning SpaceX, the SpaceX IPO. And if unless you've been living in a cave, you probably haven't heard everybody's got an opinion about this and what it means. Every podcast has experts talking about what it means. Well, I have an opinion too. And I think overall it's positive because despite what you're hearing about the SpaceX IPO basically sucking all the oxygen out of the room and absorbing all the available allocations. So we call that a crowding out effect, which delays the IPO market, which trickles down to the VC space. Despite that, I don't doubt that's true. I think the positives are that, first of all, you've got early VCs in SpaceX, a lot of them. And you've also got insiders and you've got individuals, and you had a big retail allocation, 30%. And that means that when these lockups come off, there's going to be a lot of people with a ton of liquid stock. Now, what do I mean by the lockups? When a company goes public, the bankers will negotiate, or the company will negotiate a lockup right, which restricts the shareholder from selling their shares into the public market until after a period of time, because they need the market to settle down. Because otherwise, you would have tons of stock being dumped immediately after the IPO, and that would affect the stock price, and not in a good way. So there are lockups, and the SpaceX has weird lockups because most of these insiders had to agree to much longer lockups, is what the press says. So when they come off, and it's going to be a while, but you can probably expect them to start coming off in about 6 months and completely be gone in a year or so. Then you're going to have all this money, and that's got to go somewhere. And it's what we call the mafia effect. We've got all these people with all this money, and I've seen this movie before. Like I said, I've been in the Valley a long time, over and over and over. Big company goes public, gets liquidity. All of a sudden, we're flooded with super angels all over looking to become venture capitalists themselves or to become angel investors. So I think that's what you're going to see. So now is a good time to be thinking, wherever you are, thinking about how to prepare for venture capital. So against that, what are the hottest sectors? I always like to go out and take a look around. And again, this is just my perspective, but I don't think anybody's going to disagree with me that AI is really taking up a lot of the attention and a lot of the venture capital dollars. And within AI, now we're even breaking that down into different types of applications of AI. But definitely, it's taking most of the venture dollars. And it may be that it's AI or just AI enabled, but it still kind of gets dumped into that bucket. So, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be out trying just because you're not an AI company. Because there are other industries that are doing very well also. Defense, record investment in 2025 in defense, robotics and autonomous systems, autonomous vehicles. I guess you could call that physical AI. Energy and power, because of the AI compute demand, we're seeing renewed interest in energy. Healthcare, again, this is AI driven probably, but I'm seeing tons of precision medicine companies. But the difference is now they are really getting some traction. And this is, I think when we look back on this 10 or 20 years from now, we're going to see precision medicine as the true advances of this time period, as opposed to everything else, because that technology is accelerating and making huge impacts. Cybersecurity is strong, of course. FinTech is strong, and semiconductors and space tech, believe it or not. I've been seeing companies, well, I have for a long time, for decades really, but more so lately. All right, so now you'll notice there are a couple things that are not on this list that used to be on my hottest sectors list. And I do a lot of work in agriculture technology. If you believe what's in the media, the bloom is sort of off the rose on that, but I don't think that's entirely right. because I've been seeing a lot of ag tech companies lately, and they seem to be doing okay. So I think ag tech is going to make this list again. Ad tech is off the list. Internet commerce sites are off the list. And it's not that those aren't good industries. It's just that there are other industries that seem to be getting a lot of attention right now. So, and again, that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. All right, let's get to venture capital. So here's a couple things to keep in mind before we even start down this path. I just want to give you some, let's call these overriding principles. When you think about investors, think about them as being your partners, not just somebody you're going to get money from and never talk to again. VCs really do view themselves as partners when they invest. That's why they make relatively few investments. And we'll get into the economics more specifically. That means you're going to have to deal with them. It means you're going to have to like them, or at least you're going to have to be able to tolerate them. And I'm going to give you some examples down the road where that went well and did not go so well. In fact, in my books, I talk a lot about that. Second basic principle, you want to stage your financing. And I'll talk more about this, but the idea is you would never go out and raise way more money than you need on day one, because to do that, you're raising money at too low a valuation. You want to raise just enough money on day one to get you to the valuation point, a higher valuation point, and raise just enough to get you to just another valuation point. And that way you give away less equity as you go along. So basic principle, everybody knows that. You stage the financing. Just consider the fact that most of your funding is going to be dilutive. Not all of it, but when you're in a venture space, you're talking about dilutive funding. So you're going to end up with less of the company. Seems obvious, but I'm going to talk more about what that really means. Here's a big one that you might argue with me about, but people get hung up on valuation, and I got too many slides in here already on valuation, but really it doesn't, valuation is not what you're worth. As odd as that sounds. Valuation is really just a function, right? It's a function usually of how much money you need to get to the next metric and how much equity the VC needs. Poof, there's your valuation. That's usually how it works out. Another way of looking at it is that it's an expectation of what you're going to be worth down the road, a present value of what you're going to be worth. And I have known VCs that do that calculus. They just figure out what they think you're going to be worth. If everything goes well, they present value it, they discount it for risk. And somehow by magic, it works out to get them the equity percentage that they need. It's oftentimes not your biggest issue. We'll get into term sheets. A couple of things we want to avoid: early mistakes. I talk a lot about that in some of my other presentations, which you can see in my YouTube channel. But I oftentimes say there's three kinds of mistakes. There's the kind that are no big deal, we'll fix them later, like you use Clarky to incorporate. There's a kind that, yeah, that's a problem. It's going to affect your valuation, but we'll live with it, like maybe giving away a valuable piece of IP. And then there's dead on arrival mistakes that we just can't fix. So I have a whole other presentation on what those are and how to manage that. Yeah, I know it sounds trite. Take cheap money over expensive money, meaning if you can borrow, because it's a lot cheaper than selling equity. Don't sell common stock to investors. Please don't do that. Just stop it. Stop it if you're doing that. You're going to be sorry down the road because it messes up your cap table. Get a data room. It'll make your life so much easier if you just start storing stuff, from day one and have it in a data room. It's so easy to do these days. Dropbox, Box, Google Docs. It's super easy. And we want to do the cleanup ahead of time. I know everybody wants to save money, so they defer the maintenance. And like I say, one of the three mistakes, maybe we can fix it, maybe not, maybe it delays your deal. And we have a saying in every aspect of law: time kills deals. So delay is not a great thing. So if you can just be ready to go as soon as you talk to an investor, you're better off. Build yourself an executive summary. I can tell you that you are doing the investor a favor. If you can show them at a glance whether you're in their size, sector, market, etc., and you'll do that with an executive summary, not with, a huge 50-page deck that they have to wade through. They just won't do that. But if you can send them an executive summary and say, look, this is who we are, this is our team, this is our technology, this is our market, etc., then you'll know it'll just stop you from wasting everybody's time. And if it's attractive, it may, in fact, the idea is to get people to look at your deck that otherwise might not. I don't want to talk a lot about the pitch deck here. I know there are presentations by people who do this for a living, but I will say that a pitch deck is not going to, that's not going to get you an investment, but it sure as heck can lose you an investment if it's messed up. So I really think that it's a good idea to get some professional advice on a pitch deck, because I have seen companies go in and do their big presentation and just think what it takes to get to have that meeting. You got to have the warm introduction, and then you have to have an executive summary to get someone interested, and then you actually get the meeting. And I was in one meeting where we went through the whole thing, went through the whole pitch deck, and at the end, the only comment was, yeah, you should get a professional to redo your pitch deck. You do not want your investor thinking about that. You want them focused on your team and your product and your market and how you're going to change the world and make everybody a billionaire. You don't want them thinking, boy, this guy really needs a better pitch deck. The only thing I would tell you other than that on the pitch deck, everybody wants to put their valuation in the pitch deck and talk about how much they're raising and what. Don't do that. Don't do that. It's a rookie mistake. You're going to turn people off. It looks amateurish. And also, whatever number you put in that pitch deck, your investor's going to use that. It's negotiation 101. They're going to use that as something to reduce. In fact, one VC once told me when he sees valuation at pitch deck, his mind automatically goes to half that because that's where he thinks he's going to start or probably end up. Yeah, the pitch deck people will be a lot better about this than me, but definitely you want to include your mission. You want to talk about the problem to be solved. In one of the books I recommend, there's a VC that says, the solution to the problem, aspirin, not vitamins. It's got to be a must-have, not a nice-to-have, if possible. Competition, and you do have competition. Don't ever say to somebody, there's no competition, because you look silly doing that, because clearly there is competition. Somebody else there, if they're not doing exactly what you're doing, they're offering an alternative, right? And it doesn't matter if you're selling buggy whips, right? Somebody out there might not be any more buggy whip salesmen in the country, but there's probably somebody out there that's got some sort of alternative to that. All right, let's kind of dive down a little deeper. I just want to say a few words after telling you that valuation is not that important. I'm going to tell you all about valuation, and I just want to say a few words about that. So you won't even talk about, well, you'll have a valuation cap in your early convertibles, but other than that, the real negotiation on valuation will start at what we call the priced round. That's where you're selling equity at a valuation, not a debt, not a safe, not an instrument that converts into equity, but you're actually selling a percentage of your company. And you will do that typically when you get to what we call an institutional investor, like a private equity or a venture capitalist, or maybe even a family office. That stock is going to be, that security is going to be preferred stock. As I said, you never sell common stock to raise money, right? Because why is that? Because preferred stock has preferences. And because of these preferences, it is worth more, it's priced more. And because the price is higher, the percentage of the company you give up in selling it is lower. You get more bang for your buck. Secondly, the difference between preferred and common will justify a low option price on your common. And that's going to be super important. So we all know this is a fiction. We all know it's an artificiality. It's something we've lived with in startup land since I started doing this, but everybody accepts that. Now, valuation. I have here, and I even have a memo that goes in detail on 30 different ways to value a company, right? And I don't want to go through all these other than to tell you that the investor is going to tell you what your company is worth. And every once in a great while, you'll find an investor that says, look, and by the way, they're super efficient. You'll go to 4 VCs and they'll all come back in the same range as to your valuation. I don't know how, I don't know how that happens, but it does. So it's a super efficient market. But once in a great while, you might be in the kind of market where the investor wants you to throw the first offer out there. If you have to do that, what you want to do is pick 3 of these methods, put them in a spreadsheet, and show how they all converge on the same number. And there's your valuation. That's so, like I said, there's an element of artificiality to all of this because really valuation is simply one of the factors that goes in to how much money you need, how much stock the investor needs. Okay, before you get to the VC, I really have to talk about convertible safes and convertible notes because that is how companies raise money now. So that's how startups raise money before they get to that priced round. So I want to say a few words about that. So a convertible note, first of all, let's define some terms. A convertible note, for regulatory reasons, will be relatively short term, a year or 2 years maybe. And it's debt, right? Investors loaning money to the company. Sometimes it's secured, not very often. In troubled company scenarios, it will be secured, otherwise not, because even though it's a loan, your investor is not expecting any debt type return. They're expecting equity return. They're expecting equity on the back end. And secondly, the security is not going to be worth much, because it takes a team in a startup company to realize the value of that company. So not very often is security worth anything. Once in a while, you get a company that does have hard assets, so they have some valuable asset that can stand as security, but we don't see that often. It will often subordinate to bank debt because who knows, maybe they're able to get a bank loan. It'll carry interest usually, just as if you don't, the tax law will impute an interest rate. It's easier just to carry market interest or applicable federal rate interest. One of the defining features of debt is that it has a fixed repayment date. Like I said, 12, 18, 24 months. We don't see discounts that much anymore. I'll tell you why in a minute. But we do see valuation caps, meaning that the convertible debt will convert to stock down the road when you do your priced round with the VC, and they're going to get the same or similar stock, we'll say, to what the VC is getting, preferred, different series. But it's going to be at a maximum valuation so that the investor is not letting the company use their money to build this huge valuation, therefore decreasing their interest when they do convert to equity. So let's say we have a 10 million valuation cap and your investor puts $1 million in. When you do that financing, that priced round, regardless of what the valuation is at the priced round, which we expect to be more than the cap because we expect the value to go up, the investor is going to get the benefit of a lower valuation, therefore more stock. That's debt. Now, a safe is basically a convertible debt without a interest rate and without a fixed repayment date. So it's no longer debt. Instead, it's an obligation that converts to preferred stock down the road when and if you do a preferred stock round. A couple things. There's a conversion feature. It's automatic when you convert. It just converts. It just automatically happens when you do the priced round. Sometimes there's an optional conversion. I mean, usually there is on certain events. For example, a sale of the company. And you would never have a prepayment right because, again, nobody wants to get paid their money back. They want a share of the upside. We talked about valuation cap. We used to see discounts, not so much anymore, where the investors say, look, when you convert, and I'm going to tell you why in a few minutes, but it used to be, look, you got in early, so yeah, you get in at the priced round price, but you should get a 20% discount because you saw the future, you got in early, you bet on me, etc. We want to reward you. So that's a discount. You get in at, so if the price is $1 a share, there's a 20% discount, you'll get in at less than that. Change of ownership, can convert on change of ownership or get paid back. It converts into a special kind of preferred stock called shadow preferred. I'll tell you why. Well, I'll tell you why now. Because let's say I buy a safe and it converts at a $10 million valuation, and you go out and you do a price round at a 50 million valuation. Yay, lucky me, I get the 10 million valuation, but I get preferred. That preferred is going to have a liquidation preference, meaning I get my money back first. Well, if I get the stock priced at the 50 million valuation, I would get a windfall. I would get 5 times my money back first. That's not what we mean. So we have a shadow preferred. You get the issue price back first, the 10 million valuation. Talk about pre and post money in a minute. MFN is most favored nation, which really is one of those things that makes these deals go, because it's like, look, I'll give you my money, but gee, what if you turn around tomorrow and I'm not doing any due diligence? What if tomorrow you go sell another safe at a much lower valuation or on better terms? MFN means you get the benefit of that. And we could talk for an hour about the tax treatment, so I won't. But I will tell you this: the market has taken a tax position that safes, whether pre-money or post-money, or stock for tax purposes, and that is super significant. And enjoy it while you can. If we ever get an IRS, a functioning IRS again, you can expect that rule to go away. All right. Let me just talk about value. I got to move more quickly here, but let me talk a little bit about valuation caps, just at the simplest. So pre-money valuation cap means that company sells a $1 million safe. If it's a pre-money valuation cap, that implies a $5 million post-money valuation. And this is if there's no option pool or other convertibles, that means the safe takes 20%. Okay, simple enough. Post-money means that the investor is guaranteed a certain percentage when they convert. So regardless of how many other safes you sell, if you have a $10 million post-money valuation and I buy a $1 million safe, I get 10% of that company when a safe converts, whether you sell $1 million worth of safes or $100 million worth of safes. As weird as that sounds, that is now the market standard. If you'd asked me a couple of years ago, I'd have said, yeah, 50-50. Pre-money, post-money. And pre-money, safes get diluted like everybody else. Post-money, they do not dilute for other safes. And one of the reasons, well, 2 reasons. Number one, that's what the investors insist on because they can. Number 2, there is, Y Combinator just said it shall be so, and so it is. They're an investor, so everybody uses their form because it's just so easy. But number 3 is that it doesn't really make that much of a difference if you expect to get to that priced round pretty quickly. And we all expect to get there pretty quickly. That's the nature of startups, explosive growth, right? We're going to run out of money in a year. We're going to do a priced round in a year. We're going to hit our metric within a year. So we're not going to sell that many safes. Where this comes to be a real trap here is when we sell way more post-money safes than we thought we were going to, or even pre-money for that matter. And here are the traps, because again, anybody now can go online and download a safe form and get in all sorts of trouble. So, and it'll come up when the VC comes along and starts doing due diligence. And I have had VCs walk away from a company because they let their safes, their cap table get out of control. Too many post-money safes, not enough left for the founders, right? If you give me 40 and you give your safes 80, or you give your safes 60, what's left for the founders? There's not enough to keep you guys around. You're going to quit the day I fund. So I've seen that happen. So you really want to keep track of what we call dilution stacking, right? What is the effect of all your convertibles and your option pool, by the way, and anticipate that the option pool will have to increase. So it really requires some good, Excel spreadsheet ninja skills to stay on top of this. The other big thing, well, cap tables used to be an issue, but with all the cap table tools now, it's really not, because everybody, by the time you get to the VC, hopefully you are having your cap table professionally managed. So you don't have to worry, because in the old days, they always used to be wrong because everybody was working from different numbers because they had some secret option they granted and didn't tell me about. We don't really have that problem anymore. We've got an online tool where you see it in real time. Securities law violations, though, have definitely increased while people do it themselves, because it's super easy to go online and download a safe. It is not so easy to comply with the securities laws. Maybe the federal is a little easier, they're accredited, we're good, but we have all 50 states you have to think about. There's blue sky laws. And some states are forgiving, some are not. There are a couple of them that give the investor a rescission right if you mess this up. So, caution is my watchword. Sometimes we just skip all this. We used to do this a lot more than we do now, and just go to a simple watered down preferred, has very little rights. That's good for everybody in that it just anchors. It's good for you, the company, because now you've anchored. Well, first of all, you set a price, you justified your low option price, but you put the investor in as a stockholder, so they're going to dilute with you going forward, whereas they wouldn't with a post-money save. So it is something to consider if you can get away with it. Now, finally, 37 minutes in, we're going to talk about venture capital. So Randy is a venture capitalist, and in his book, he says, avoid venture capital. So that gives you a hint as to what's to come. So you have to ask the question, right from the start, should you be even thinking about this? Because think about this, you got to give up equity. So venture capital tends to be, I'm going to give you the downsides, and I'm not being negative. I mean, it's only my whole life, that's what I do, right? Is VC deals. So I'm very positive about venture capital, but I do have to give you the downsides, because you want to make sure you're the right company for this. So number one, you got to give up equity, and that makes this really expensive money. Okay, because it's always more expensive to give equity instead of cash. That's why if you can borrow, you should borrow. And if you can borrow, you are not a candidate for venture capital, because that means that you must have cash flow, because otherwise, who's going to lend to you if you don't have cash flow to repay? So you're not reinvesting in your business and building a humongous goodwill asset, not paying any taxes until you exit and then getting out under QSBS. I said a mouthful. I'll go through that, but I can just say that usually it's companies that need cash because they're building so rapidly, not companies that have EBITDA or have cash flow that they can repay debt. It's risky for the venture capitalists, so it's for risky companies. That is high return, but high risk, high growth potential. It's illiquid for the VC, so that's going to affect your pricing. And you really have to have a business that can scale. So if you go into the VC and say, look, someday this business is going to be worth $10 million. Yeah, you're not a VC deal. It's just not enough. There's not enough money in it. And I'll tell you why in a minute here. But it has to be scalable. And similarly, big growth, big market. So who should you approach? Let me just jump ahead a little. So I want to talk about the economics, because you want to get inside the head of the people you're dealing with or going to be dealing with, and just understand what they're thinking when they come and look at you. So this is the standard formula. I mean, it varies a little. It's, the management fee will scale to 2.5. Sometimes it's a little less. Carried interest is a percentage of the gain from the investment. And these funds have a term, 7 years plus extensions. Now, the VC's sitting there with this pool of money, And he's saying, look, I got to give my LPs back 3 times what they invested. And to do that, let's do the math or ask Claude, and we'll figure out that we got to earn 3 or 4 times our investment on the fund in order to do that. And it gets worse because half of these VCs are going to lose money, or these investments rather, are going to lose money. Maybe a third are going to return my money, maybe a little more. So I got to have some home runs, right? I have to have 10x, 100x. And think of it this way, because this is the way they're thinking about it. The way it was described to me once by a VC, as he said, look, if I invest in a company and my first investment returns 100x, let's do the math. Let's see, what do I have to return on the next 9 before my fund's exhausted? And the answer is it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter. They're looking for the home run. That's what they're looking for. That implies high risk, but nevertheless, it implies that they think you're going to get there. And the fit is a large potential market. Not, I said a large market. Let me be clear. Potential market, right? I mean, think of all the companies that are being formed right now for a market that does not yet exist because we don't know. It's like Henry Ford said, if he had asked the market what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, not cars. The market didn't even exist. Yeah, that's a little old, but the concept still holds. Large potential market. It's great if you can have a first to market advantage, long-term scale, and of course, everybody talks about traction, which revenue is a form of traction. You need to prove it. Some companies, like biotech, you're not going to have revenue for a long time, but you should be able to prove it. Your VC is going to want to participate in management. I said that they're partners. So they'll want board seats, they'll want board observer seats. That means somebody can sit in on board meetings. They don't vote, they don't make decisions, but they sit in. And sometimes other regulatory reasons they'll ask for management rights. It really precludes small investments when you think about these economics, because if they're going to have to sit on a board, how many boards can a person sit on, right? So it means that there's only a limited number of companies, and I've got this pool of funding. Poof, that means each of my investments has to be at least this much. So that's why VC investments tend to be larger. What are they thinking about? I mean, I'm talking about this for 30 years. Team is number one. I've been seeing that the longer I do this, the more I believe it. I could give you plenty of examples, and I do talk about them in my books, of companies that got everything wrong except team. Pandora, for example, had a business that was arguably illegal. They found it in a recession. There wasn't really a market for it, but they had an awesome team and they managed to make it work. Good technology or product. Okay, from your standpoint, picking a VC, if you have the luxury of picking among VCs, and by the way, ideally, that's where you'd like to be. You'd like to be able to solicit not just one term sheet, but a handful of term sheets and then compare them. And if you can time this and stage this correctly, you can get there. But number one is reputation. We all talk. Everyone's got a reputation. And some investors play well with founders better than others. And the first thing I do whenever I deal with anybody, by the way, is I just go search the docket and see how litigious they are. And you might want to know that. But more than that, you probably want to ask around. How have they been? Do they always fire the founder, right? Do they force you to liquidate early? Will they work with you? Will they do follow-on funding? Okay, that's important. Are they likely to close? Because some VCs, they put out lots of term sheets but rarely close them. The smaller ones that you've never heard of. The big VCs, they do not do that because they know that that's just poison to their reputation. If you get a term sheet from a big name brand VC, oh, you're going to close. Stage of the fund, size of the fund, what I mean by dry powder, and this similarly, how much term is left. So you take an investment from the VC, you may need follow-on money later. In fact, you will certainly need to do another round, usually. I shouldn't say certainly, but usually. And when you go do that, if your early VCs don't participate in the second round, well, that sends a signal to the market, and it's not a good signal. So it'd be nice to know that the VC you're dealing with has enough cash to put in the next round. Not only because you need the cash, because you need to tell later investors that your investors believe in you. And make sure you're dealing with a decision maker, right? Because the bigger firms tend to be quite bureaucratic. Read my book, read the story of Circle Up, the fight between the VC and the founder. Boy, talk about a relationship going bad. You just want to make sure you got a good fit. That was harder to do a few years ago when everybody did everything by Zoom, but now you can meet people in person and see how well they tip the waiter or whatever your metric is. Let's see. Types of funds, syndicates. I want to get into some more strategic venture capital. More and more, I'm seeing strategic venture capital, and that means rather than just a financial investor, you have an investor that makes the investment because they want your product, they want your supply, maybe they want to acquire you down the road, maybe they just want to take you out of the market, whatever it is. So I'm seeing more and more of that. It's really sort of a different ballgame. They have different issues. They have strategic objectives, generally less operational involvement. And that's good and bad when you're trying to chase someone for director consent. It's bad. It's good when you want to just kind of run your business. So it's something to consider. Venture debt. Let me get more into preparing because that is the name of this presentation. So structuring. You're going to be a Delaware C corporation. If you want to know why, you're not going to be an LLC. You're not going to be an S corp. You're not going to be a trust, or a Liechtenstein Stichting, which I have formed. You're going to be a Delaware C corporation. And you can read my book or watch an hour video on my YouTube channel to find out why. But at a high level, it's all of these things, but most importantly, it's this one, or these three, I should say. And number one is the most important, qualified small business stock. And coincidentally, I'm doing a webinar tomorrow on qualified small business stock, but I have several videos up on this. And this is the provision that basically allows the investor to exclude up to $15 million or 10 times their cost basis from federal taxable gain, right? So it is a huge giveaway, a huge giveaway. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it is the biggest giveaway in the entire tax code. And I am sometimes a tax lawyer. It really is huge. And everybody knows about it. Everybody wants it. And you can only give that if you are a C corporation. The other issues we used to talk about is that, we don't want to invest in messy pass-throughs. We have to be able to manage our losses, etc. Yeah, that's all true as well. All right. I want to jump ahead a little bit to let's talk just for a second or a minute about vesting. These days, everybody vests. We all know that. What that means is that you're a service provider. You earn into your shares over a period of time, and everybody starts with 4-year vesting. Don't get it into your head that 4 years from now, if you start vesting today, that you're going to be 100% vested. Because what will happen is a VC will come along and they will say, yeah, that's great that you're fully vested. You need to unvest because I need a way to know you're going to stick around until the end. So your vesting period could be 8 years, right? And that's the 4 years initially plus the refresh or the unvesting. And thinking, also consider that a fund life, 7 to 10 years, they're thinking of an exit within that time, ideally. So they're going to need you to vest for that period of time. And most exits are M&A, by the way. So that's what we're all looking for. By the way, oftentimes now, and I hate it, but we see it all the time, is everybody will get the idea that I don't have stock, I have an option. My option agreement says I have to exercise within 30 days of termination of employment. How about we just make that like a year from termination of employment or some, and I don't like doing that, even though we always do it. And the reason why is it creates what we call option overhang, because we kind of can deal with the rough justice of people leaving, options going back to the pool, being regranted, etc. But when you have these long exercise periods, well, all of a sudden that option pool starts to be a pretty significant part of your cap table. Super voting stock. So that's a special class of common that has super voting rights. About 1 in 10 times I will see this. And the problem is the problem is it's going to get negotiated away eventually. It's one more part of the story you have to explain to your investor, and you're trying to be a glass box and simple. But, there are companies with this dual class stock structure that have done very well with it. And that's usually when you have a super dominant personality CEO that really insists on keeping control of the common vote. So I will do it, but I'll tell people I think you're going to be, you're trying to hardwire something that cannot be hardwired. And by the way, none of this before the investment is hardwired. The VCs turn it all into a pancake, even your founder equity. All right, transfer restrictions. Let me just give you a few terms so you're familiar with them. We're now into VC terms. First of all, the ROFR. And there's a right of first refusal in favor of the company. And then there's a and this is on your common stock, rarely on the investor's stock, but not never. And that means that before you can sell your stock, you have to offer it back to the company. That's the primary right of first refusal on the same terms. If the company doesn't buy it, then you can sell it in a third-party sale subject to these other rights. The effect of that is to chill sales, because who's going to bother making an offer if they know that you can't sell it? However, companies can waive that right, and then you do what we call a secondary transaction. And look at SpaceX, that happens a lot. In fact, I'd say it happens almost every Series B round now when founders take money off the table when they do the round. But anyway, that's the primary ROFR. If the company doesn't buy the stock back, then there's always a secondary ROFR in favor of the VC, meaning that if the company doesn't buy, then the investor has the option to buy those shares. And then if you don't sell, then you can sell subject to the other rights. And by other rights, I'm saying specifically co-sale rights. For example, if you find a buyer for your shares, co-sale means you have to bring your VC along. So in other words, you have to allow them to sell it to participate in that sale. And there's a mechanism for doing that I won't get into. A drag along you will always see, and that's just the flip side of a co-sale or a tag along right. And a drag along means that if the investor usually finds a buyer for their shares, but they say, look, I want everyone's shares, they can force the other parties to participate in that sale. They can force a sale of the company. Easier said than done, but it's always said in these VC deals that the practical effect is that it really operates as a waiver of appraisal and dissenters' rights, but it's a topic for a different discussion. I want to talk about, because we're preparing for venture, about the cap table. And the way I like to do it is the way I've always done it over the years. And these are aspirational, we'll say. Ideally, we would see the future, get our crystal ball out, and say, this is where we want to be at the end of Series B. So to do that, I have to back into it. So if this is where I want to be at the end of Series B, well, that means that this is where I want to be at the end of Series A, and this is where my stock pool is going to be, and this is how many shares the founder should get. That's usually how I go about setting up a cap table to start with. And again, it's aspirational because it will get messy by the time you get there, but it's good to have a goal. And then finally, the other diligence issues when you get into venture. So before you get there, remember the data room? Remember the cleanup? Let's get this all set before we get there. If you're a tech company, like 99% of the companies I deal with, then your IP rights are super important. So let's make sure that they're all buttoned down and the ownership trail is evident from the data room. Employment claims. This is kind of the sleeper because, especially here in California, where the only thing that is more one-sided than our employment laws are our landlord-tenant laws. And we all just kind of live with that, sunshine dividend. But every once in a while, if you mess up on an employment claim, it can be huge. It can be catastrophic. And I talk more about that online. Just Google HomeJoy sometime if you want to see how bad. $60 million, poof. Tax claims, you want to resolve regulatory issues, litigation, for God's sake. I hope there's no litigation. That's a showstopper there. And then more basic things. You don't want claims by prior employers. Suddenly you're successful and your prior employer comes along and says, yeah, that was my idea or my IP. We want to make sure that we have the flexibility to fire the founders, sorry to say. So we want those agreements not to be, nobody gets guaranteed, at least not around here. You don't get guaranteed employment for life. And make sure all the material agreements are in the data room and there's no, you haven't sold the farm inadvertently, which people sometimes do. Talked about QSBS. I'm going to drill down a little bit more on term sheets just for a few minutes. I'm going to cut into our Q&A time. But here's what typical preferred stock will look like. And I'm going to give you the highest 3-4 points. Number one, it's typically non-participating 1X. What does that mean? It means that the investor, they can either elect to get their money back or they convert to common stock and they get their percentage. So I put $1 million in. Let's use an example. I put a 1X non-participating preferred. If I put $1 million in for 10%, if you have a sale of the company for $5 million, well, let's see. I can take my $1 million back, or I can take 10% of 5 million. You know what? I think I want my $1 million back right off the top. On the other hand, if there's a sale for 20 million, well, let's see. 10% of 20 million is 2 million. I think I'll take my 10% instead of the million. That's non-participating convertible preferred. Participation means that you get your $1 million back plus you get your 10%. And usually there's a cap when you see participation, but we just never see that anymore, to be honest with you. Rarely. I shouldn't say never. I mean, I just did about 6 months ago. Dividends, preferred will have a dividend preference, which is meaningless because it is always non-cumulative. So the dividend is only paid when, as, and if declared. Now, if you're doing a private equity deal, it's much different. Then you will have what they call a cumulative dividend, which is like interest. It just accrues every year. And then finally you have an exit and there's that big cumulative dividend. Yeah, the liquidation preference we talked about. The investor will want representation on the board typically. And usually Series A, I aim for a 3-member board with 1 investor, 1 founder, and a 3rd industry participant. Sometimes it's more founder friendly and we can get the common to select the 3rd, but usually that's where we end up. But it'd be nice if we can control the board after A. You'll never control it after B. And again, we'll have observers typically. The investors will always ask for a set of protective provisions. And what I mean by that is a separate vote for the investors on various actions. For example, you can't go sell stock that's ahead of theirs without their consent, that kind of thing. You can't sell the company without the investor's consent, etc. It's all what you would expect. And most of this is very standardized, but there are a handful of protective provisions that get negotiated depending on the bargaining strength of the parties. Information rights. I do several podcasts on financials, by the way. And I know you're all on QuickBooks now, if that, maybe Excel, but you are going to have to impose some financial discipline. And the sooner you do that, the better, because I see it happen over and over again where you get the financing, then you have to get an accountant, then you have to deliver audited statements. And we come to find out that the company is so far off gap, that everybody's upset about the financials they got. So I really think you ought to at least get compiled or reviewed statements later. And I have a whole hour on this on my YouTube as to what that means. Reg rights, they're just so standard. I don't want to talk about them, but it just requires the company to list shares if the investor demands it. I've never seen that happen. We talked about transfer restrictions. We talked about vesting. A pro rata right. The investor, even your smarter, safe investors, will ask for a right to maintain, right? So in other words, or a right to participate. And we give those to what we call major investors. And what it means is that if the company goes out to raise more money and you're already invested, it's like, well, gee, this is a great company. I want some of that additional stock. I'll double down. I'll put more money in. And you'd feel kind of silly if you weren't able to. So we have pro rata rights. Like I say, sophisticated investors, even angels, will ask for that. Expect your option plan to increase and expect it to increase pre-money, meaning that you, the founders, take the dilution from having an option plan that is set at a target that equals a certain percentage post-money. And if I had time, I'd go through an example of that. Do not see redemption rights. That's the right of the venture capitalist to force the company to buy their stock back. Rarely see that anymore, but not never. Anti-dilution, it's always broad-based weighted average, which is very watered down. It would take me forever to go through that formula, but it's not what you'd expect. It's not, a lot of people think of anti-dilution, they think of full ratchet. I get 10% forever and ever. That's not how it works. It's just that if the company does a later financing at a lower value, you'll get a small adjustment. And by the way, that's almost always waived when that happens, just to get the deal done. And once you sign a term sheet, expect to be out of the market for some period of time. So just keep that in mind. You want to be very careful. And even though these term sheets claim to be non-binding, especially during that time period, except for the no shop to confidentiality, yeah, be careful about that, because the law will impose a good faith obligation on your part to negotiate, which is why I have magic language, I guess, special language that will cause that term sheet to terminate if a deal is not done after a certain period of time. But unless you have that, you're kind of obligated to do your best. To finish up on this, planning for later rounds, be careful when you're comparing term sheets about overly favorable terms, because if you have to do a down round later, because you guys got the valuation all wrong in the A round, that's not a good thing. That doesn't send a very happy signal to the market. And the other times that'll happen is if you get it way off, you might have to do a reverse split, right? In other words, you authorize 50 million, but you look silly because your stock's selling at worth very little. So now you got a reverse split to 10 million. That also sends, so bad things can happen. So, be careful about overly favorable terms. And I can show you the math where this could work out, where the founder ends up with less stock at the end of the day after doing the overvalued round and then the down round than if they had just done, 2 rounds at the same price. And then finally, just be prepared that you as CEO are going to be replaced. It's a rare individual who can be a CEO throughout the entire life of a company. Well, I shouldn't say rare, but let's say it usually happens that the company will have a different CEO by the time it gets to exit, if it stays around long enough. And the VCs are not shy about putting in the right person to maximize value. Troubled company terms, yeah, why be a downer? But all this stuff goes out the window a little bit when you have a company that is super desperate, or we're just trying to salvage whatever we can. And then we get all sorts of workout terms, and I do those deals as well. And they're great if you're the investor. Well, they're not great for anybody, really. But one thing I will talk about is pay to play, because you may hear that. And what that does, it requires the existing investors to invest more money in order to maintain their rights in the prior round. And if they don't, they get squashed, legal term, which means they lose their preferential rights. They get converted to some, smaller number of common shares, and that can be really ugly. I've got several slides on alternative financing. I want to go to questions, but I do want to say you should look into this is totally not VC. I call it royalty financing. It's really a percentage of revenues. Angels will do these deals. I see that from time to time. Yeah, we don't do ICOs in the United States anymore. And I have a whole hour on securities laws I'm not going to get into now. So, to conclude, on my slides, you'll find a list of books that I think you should read in your spare time. If you're interested in this space, they are actually pretty good reading. So, go for it. There they are. Of course, at the top of the list are my books, because I'm conflicted in this recommendation, I will admit. That's me. I'm Roger Royce, Haynes Boone, Palo Alto, California. And there's my LinkedIn. There's a list of our offices, which you'll notice has been updated for Boston, which was just recently joined our group. There's my first book, written about 10 years ago, 2012, I guess longer than that. And my more recent one, written over a bottle of scotch and COVID lockdown. So action-packed. And with that, I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to stop the record.